Good evening. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Eric Ely. I'm the Director of Development for Columbia Athletics. I want to wish you all good health in these trying times for you and your families. This is the third virtual event that Columbia Athletics Office of Alumni Development has put on, and the next one will be in the next 2 weeks. We'll be able to confirm the time and date and content very shortly. But if you are enjoying these broadcasts, you should hold this time next Thursday, 2 Thursdays from now in the evening, and we'll be announcing that shortly. One final note, if you have any question during today's presentation, please email them to me. My email address is ee2133@columbia.edu. Send those to me. I'll make sure Peter gets them, and then he can ask our guest. So our panelists, Peter Pilling, the Campbell Director of Intercollegiate Athletics and Physical Education, is ending his 5th full academic year at the helm of Columbia Athletics. Peter has an incredibly successful tenure so far, although sorry, my notes got screwed up. That's
enough, Eric. We can move on.
No, we gotta complete it, Peter. So, through this year's season, although this year's season was cut short, we still saw Columbia women's cross country team and Columbia's women's fencing team repeat as IB champions, and we had a number of individual Ivy League champions as well. We are incredibly grateful for Peter's leadership. Our guest, Thad Sheely. Thad Sheely is a Columbia College class of 1993 and a former Columbia rower. Thad is currently the Chief Operating Officer of the Atlanta Hawks and of State Farm Arena. Thad oversees all aspects of team and arena business operations and real estate development. He joined the Hawks in 2015 with over 20 years of experience in the sports and real estate industry. In addition to a degree in urban studies from Columbia College, Sheely also hosts an MBA from Stanford Business School. Thank you for joining us, Shad.
Thank you.
I will now turn it over to Peter. Thank you both.
All right. Awesome. Thanks,
Thanks,
Eric.
Eric.
Appreciate your time and appreciate your staff putting this together. We're really excited for tonight to have an opportunity to talk with Thad, and we appreciate it. So, Thad, first off, all the books behind, are those your core curriculum textbooks and different things?
Yeah, unfortunately, those haven't actually made the trip finally. But yeah, there are a few maybe on that side. Yeah,
I've enjoyed all of these webinars and Zoom meetings. You try to figure out what everybody's reading. So at some point today, we'll find out what your book of the month is, and you'll give us some expertise there. But thank you very much for joining us. Maybe it'd be insightful for you to give us a little bit of background. Obviously, you wrote at Columbia, ended up getting your Stanford MBA, but have a little bit of a sports/real estate background. So why don't you take some time and just kind of introduce your career, both in the variety of different sports industries, and then we'll take it from there.
sure. First of potentially many disclaimers, I was a coxswain on the Columbia heavyweight crew team, not a rower. While I might have gained the COVID-19, I'm definitely not in coxswain shape anymore. I don't know what coxswain shape is. Joke for the crew members. So I graduated in 93. I was sort of trying to do the math, and we spoke yesterday, and to me, Columbia holds a really special place in my heart. I think I can trace back sort of where I am today to sort of where I started at Columbia. And that was my junior year. We had a junior class dinner, and there was a gentleman by the name of Arthur Spector, who's a friend of yours and a huge supporter of Columbia, and from the great class of 1968, as he would say, 25 years prior to me. And he came and he talked to our junior class dinner about being New York City's investment banker. I didn't really know what that meant at the time. I was a junior. I was taking Esther Fuchs' urban studies class. I was trying to get into Ken Jackson's bicycle ride across New York. And I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. And I filed that away. Fast forward 2 years later, I had graduated from Columbia. I worked for a year in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, which I got that job through a low library career fair, thanks to low library. And I was trying to think about what do I want to do next. And I have dogs, so there might be dogs in the background. I apologize. That wasn't Eric, who popped in for a second. And so I thought I wanted to go to business school, and I realized that, look, I'm an urban studies undergrad. I haven't really shown any finance jobs. I took one econ class. I think I got my worst grade at Columbia in principles of economics. And that I called up Arthur Spector, though. who spoke to us at that junior class dinner, and he had just left Goldman to join Prudential Securities to build a public finance group. And I said, hey, you got any opportunities? And I think literally 2 weeks later, I was working in Arthur's group at Prudential Securities in the public finance division. At that time, a lot of these, and so I worked there for a year. We did a bunch of, chasing deals. I'm an analyst. You're basically, you do, what every 23-year-old does in New York that works for a bank. You work hellish hours and you're in front of a computer and you try not to get in any trouble. But a year later, there was a position that opened up with an MD who had a specialty in sports facility finance. At that time, like 25 years ago, a lot of these sports facilities were being financed through the public markets, through the sports authorities, through cities and states. And I became his analyst, and I thought this was pretty cool. So I did that for basically a year, applied to business school, wrote my business school essays about sort of that intersection of public finance and municipal development and urban studies, and was lucky enough to get into Stanford. And when I went to school, I thought, yes, it was 1996 or 1997, and I was out in Silicon Valley. But to me, I was like, I really think I missed that internet train. So what I know is the sports stuff, but I really would like to be on the other side of it. So rather than writing the checks, let me spend the money that gets spent. And so through a network that I had built, being at Prudential, thanks to Arthur, called up a guy, Jay Cross, who became my mentor. He actually is a Columbia grad, was one of the first architecture of science degrees or something like that, architecture and real estate degrees. And he had just joined the Miami Heat. So I joined him for my summer internship to help them think about how to finance this building. And then fast forward, I went back to the Heat. He went to work for the Jets. I followed him to the Jets. I worked for the Jets for about 12 years. And then he went to work for Related at Hudson Yards, which was the site of what could have been, maybe should have been, maybe would have been, maybe can't be, a Jet stadium on the west side of Manhattan. And so we knew that site really well. And I ended up taking a little sabbatical from sports and working for 3 years for Related and Hudson Yards on that development, which was an unbelievable experience on every level. And then I got a phone call that somebody new had just bought the Atlanta Hawks, and they were looking for someone to come in and sort of run the business and work on all these real estate transactions and deals and developments that they needed to do. And so we moved our family down here about 4.5 years ago and have had a really awesome time and love Atlanta and love the Hawks and love what we've been able to do here.
That's awesome. So I know that Phillips Arena, which is now State Farm Arena, was originally built in the 1999, I believe. And then you went through this kind of transformation with the building. Can you kind of describe, because obviously you have this real estate background, the residents of us that are in New York City, we kind of understood what MSG did, how they kind of did it in sections, how you went through that renovation, if you will, rather than building a new building there in Atlanta for the team.
Yeah, we followed the MSG folks very closely, obviously, and what they did. I think that in Atlanta, we had tagline work. We had a commercial that said, we're the second biggest renovation behind Madison Square Garden. Madison Square Garden, I think, was like $1.2 billion. Right. We were about $200 million. That's the cost of doing business in New York, first of all. And that Madison Square Garden, for all of its wondrous beauty and amazingness, it is an incredibly complicated challenge building. Like the loading docks are 6 floors above 34th Street. And so it's very challenging, but that, they actually outlawed the term renovation. They called it a transformation. We're a little bit more humble in the South and we called it a renovation. But what we were really trying to do and think about was, thinking about a renovation as innovation, thinking about how this can change the building. You're right. Phillips Arena opened in 1999. It was one of 7 venues that was built at the time in that 1 year. Seven NBA arenas who opened in that 1 year, and 17 years later was the only one who hadn't undergone some significant renovation. And so we were really in need of a renovation in terms of all the sports, politics, city stuff. That about, I think, 3 months prior to the Atlanta Hawks being sold, the Atlanta Braves moved out of downtown Atlanta out to Cobb County. And if you know anything about Atlanta, right, there's Atlanta City, the proper, there's inside the perimeter, and then there's outside the perimeter. And the Braves, by moving outside the perimeter, were perceived as turning their backs from the city's perspective, from the mayor's perspective, not necessarily residents, but from the mayor's perspective, turning their back on the city of Atlanta. And so the mayor was really aggressive about wanting to make sure that the Atlanta Hawks stayed in downtown Atlanta. So he committed about $150 million in public money to help us renovate it. We put in 50, and what we really focused on is recreating that experience. I think over the last, since I started in sports, the experience of coming to a game has totally transformed. It used to be, there was a sense that like the arena floor, right, or the field was like a black box. It existed in order to be on TV and to be broadcast on television, and that the spectators were just sort of part of the background of the crowd. And what's changed is that, right, everything's been written about this, like this is nothing that we created by any stretch, but like this idea of an experience economy, right? That like the currency in today's world is about experiences, right? How do you give people those experiences that they'll remember, that they'll come back to, that they'll pay for? And I think music, I think sports, right? I think food, I think all the things that we do in arena experiences. And so that's really what we leaned into to say, how do we create an unbelievable local Atlanta experience that is going to set us up for the future? And so that's what we try to do.
So how long did that transformation take place? And were there key elements of that you alluded to the experience? Were there key elements of that you were trying to conquer and overcome?
Yep. So we closed the building for the summer over 2 years. So the NBA season obviously is from sort of October through hopefully June. In our case, because we were rebuilding, it was more like April. But that we closed for the summer, so we lost concerts, but we were able to do all the work thanks to, we actually hired the construction team that built Madison Square Garden. So they have a local office, but they brought in literally the guys who were the project managers of the Madison Square Garden building to help us sequence all the individual pieces to make sure that we could actually get this done. And it's a pretty scary moment when you're like, oh, we got to open this building in a month and it still looks like it's not ready to open. But there was one key move that we did. And this is, to me, like, it's one of those interesting experiences that Jenna Marie Smith, is a woman who, she's in the Sports Business Journal Hall of Fame. She is the brains behind the Camden Yards renovation or building. So Camden Yards, every new baseball stadium basically said, give me Camden Yards, that's what I want. She touched that emotion, that sense of history of what baseball is all about. And she, I think, helped design and build one of the greatest baseball stadiums ever. So Stan Kasten, also a Columbia grad, who was the head, he worked at Turner and he was the head of all the Atlanta teams for a long time. He brought in Jenna Marie Smith. He since moved to the Dodgers and brought Jenna Marie Smith out with him to help redefine the LA Dodger Stadium. So, like, all stories repeat themselves. But that she brought Jenna Marie Smith down and said, I want you to do for arenas what you did for baseball stadiums. Reinvent them, rethink them, like make this into a new experience. And what she came up with was this idea that, like, so much of the arena experience, because it's music and it's luxury and it's suites and it's all this premium stuff, that she said, let's put all that on one side of the building. And then let's really focus on that premium experience and let everyone else have a really sort of good time on their own. And let's sort of bifurcate that experience. That didn't work. And so to me, the lesson a little bit, and while I have a tremendous amount of respect for everything that Jenna Marie Smith has done and accomplished, to me, it's a great lesson in that, like, not every experience is transferable. And that if you think that experience and that success that you had on one project is going to transfer to the next, it doesn't necessarily happen. And so I used to say that the mark of a good idea is that it gets replicated, right? That people steal that idea and do it again. And Phillips Arena was the first and last arena to try to put all of their premium seats on one side of the building. It really created this haves and have-nots. So what we did was we knocked down that wall of premium and we made the building sort of one. We connected all the concourses, we spread out all the product, we differentiated the product, even all the way down to creating what we call the Hawk Bar, which is a club on the floor. So we took out 100 seats, which was like, oh, you can't take out seats. Like, seating count is what this is all about. But we took out about 100 seats behind the basket and we created this thing called a Hawk Bar. And so if you sit on the floor, that at Madison Square Garden, you go out to the Delta Club and you sit on the floor and you go in this Delta Club and it's like you're in like your basement. Right. And it's like a really cool basement sports club, but it's in the basement. But we opened that up. And so you're literally standing on the floor. We extended the hardwood underneath the club, and you can stand on the floor right behind the basket and talk and socialize and have a good time and have that experience. And so those were the things that we tried to think about.
Yeah, awesome. So another Columbia connection, your owner, Tony Ressler, has a MBA from Columbia. So we're connecting all the dots all around. I know he has a Georgetown undergrad. Tell me about your relationship with him, your interaction with him, how you keep him, communicate with him in terms of what you're trying to accomplish and how you're achieving your goals and objectives.
So I don't think Tony's on the call, so this is not brown nosy, but I really do think Tony has the potential to be one of the best owners in sports. He comes from a private equity world. He started at Apollo, and then he founded Ares with a number of partners, and really comes with a private equity mindset. And that private equity mindset is really about identifying talent and management and putting them in place and challenging them and holding them accountable, but making them successful. And that's what he's done to a great degree. When I first started, he sort of identified what he called the core four. And this is really why I took the job. And there were 4 real estate projects. 2 of them were about basketball, and 2 of them were about more the fan experience. So we wanted to build a new training facility for the team, which we opened and built in 2017, I'm going to say now, with Emory. And I think it's become a real model for what a training facility could be. We didn't just build a training facility for the Hawks. We partnered with Emory Hospital, and we built a 30,000 square foot orthopedic and physical therapy practice. And then we went out and found this guy, Harvard guy, Dr. Marcus Elliott, who sort of made his name with the Kraft family and the Patriots, also Columbia grads, and really took this scientific approach to training. And so he has one office out in Santa Barbara. The Wall Street Journal's written about him. A bunch of folks have said like these amazing things about him. And there are certain of these medical turned trainers that are sort of a little bit, I will call fly by night. That's not Marcus Elliott. This guy's a scientist. This guy's an MD. This guy knows what he's doing. And he's really trying to bring data science into medical training. And so we actually built, it's called P3, Peak Performance Project. We built P3 as a part of our training facility. So number 1, training facility. Number 2, a G League team, really important in order to build your capacity as a basketball franchise. The G League is the minor league really for the NBA. So we had to build an arena for our G League team, which we built in partnership with a town called College Park down by the airport. So that's done. And then the 2 other pieces were renovating the arena. And then just like whether it's Detroit or Sacramento or Orlando or Dallas, there was these arenas are often in downtown locations that sort of in that post-industrial development phase were neglected. And there was a lot of open space or parking or underutilized square footage around it. And so in partnership with CIM, which is an LA-based developer, we've purchased about 45 acres of downtown Atlanta that we intend to develop into the next downtown for Atlanta. And so Tony really put that agenda together. He gave us the strategy, the vision, the resources to go and try to make that happen. And in 3 years, in about 3 years, we accomplished 3 of them. We've now accomplished the last one, and we're on to our next thing. So it's been exciting.
So let me ask you a little about this training facility, because it seems like that is playing a bigger and bigger role in the NBA, specifically with free agents. I know that Kevin Durant made reference that he was going to potentially come to New York, but one of the tipping points was that he really liked the Nets training facility. So as you design this, it's interesting with free agents now, it almost is equivalent to college recruiting, and you're coming back. So what role does that, because they're there 90% of the time,
Right.
and they're spending all their time there, they're training there, they're obviously practicing there. So how important was that in terms of potential free agency and the impact it would have on the Hawks?
Absolutely. So one confirming comment, one maybe conflicting comment. Colleges, like this was the problem, is that basketball players and football players would graduate from college and they would go to the pros, and the facilities were worse than they were in college. And so when I worked for the Jets, we built a new training facility for the Jets out in Florham Park. And same thing here, that we didn't just go, and there's this sort of like obligatory tour that you do when you're building a new either arena or stadium or training facility. You go out and you look in the marketplace to see what anyone else has done. We didn't just go to pro teams. We went to colleges. We went to University of Texas, Texas A&M. We looked at everything that Oregon had done, Ohio State, and some other places. And those college facilities are awesome. And so you had this funny thing of of players graduating from college or going from college to the pros and taking a step down in their facilities. So that is 100% true. There is a sort of a sense of a little bit of an arms race around practice facilities. I'll channel my general manager, Travis Schlenk, a little bit. I'll channel Steve Gutman, who was the president of the Jets for like 25 years and an amazing New Yorker in so many ways. And he would always say, it's about three things. It's about the money, the money, the money. And so while I think that you can sort of convince yourself that, having this training facility is a competitive advantage for free agency, it's not actually a competitive advantage, but what it is it's a signal. It's a signal to players that your owner cares to invest in the team and in you. And that's important. And so no one's going because like, oh, that's a really nice weight room. Right. Like maybe in college they make that decision, but ultimately, right, the difference between, what might seem like on the margin, $120 million contract and $130 million contract, that's $10 million.
Right.
Like that's a lot of money, right? And so, but there really is a signaling that goes on. And I do think the signal is important that the owner cares and that also that the team is progressive in the way that they think about, for our case, sports, medicine, and science, and how did those things come together to make you better, right? Every player, when they sign as a free agent, what they care about most is their next contract. And how is this organization going to help me get my next contract? Hopefully here. I don't think there's a cynicism about like somewhere else, but how do I get my next contract? So how can I prolong my career, right? And how can I get better here?
Yeah, fascinating. So you also, Grant Hill plays a significant role within the Hawks organization. Can you describe what he does and the impact he has both on the basketball side, but on the overall structure of the department?
Yeah, so typically sort of NBA teams are organized around sort of a single governor. And then there's 2 or 3 alternate governors who have a lot of influence at both the ownership level and then at the league level. For us, Grant Hill is one of those guys. Grant, I said to Peter earlier, Grant is one of those guys that like, he's almost too good to be true. He is like, he is a scholar, he's an athlete, he's an amazing human being. He's so talented and he's so true and real and has a real amazing heart. And I think the Grant Hill story, would be its own version of The Last Dance, if that could be told. But for us, I think it's super important that players, the NBA is a players' league. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. Understanding players, understanding what drives them, what motivates them, how to convince them to come and join your team. The guy like Grant, who has been a player at obviously a super high level, that he gets that. And for us, he's that link to the players to really understand what's important to them.
That's awesome. Well, let's take a little bit of a pivot. Your last home game was against the Knicks, and it was the night that things kind of changed in the world of sports. The Ivy League had made this decision the day before to cancel their tournament, and a lot of people were saying, well, gosh, what's the Ivy League doing? The basketball tournaments are going to continue to go on in terms of the NCAA. And then Rudy Gobert happened. Can you describe that night for you? Because you guys were home, and what exactly transpired and what took place that evening?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, when you asked me this question, like I hadn't actually told that story before because basically everyone I've talked to was there that night, right? But, March 11th, there was obviously a lot of talk and concern about what's going to happen. I think, honestly, like we brought a whole task force together at our organization to see sort of what's going to happen. Our CEO had meetings with the governor and the state to talk about, are we going to stay open? Are we not? There was an expectation that Golden State was going to have a game on Thursday night without fans based on what California was going to require. And we thought that there was a high likelihood with a game on Wednesday, a concert on Friday, and another game against the Cavs on Saturday. And we thought that, the NBA is not going to make a snap decision. Saturday might be our last game without fans. How do we start to prepare for that? I'm not ashamed to admit, but like it is, because like it's a learning sort of exercise, but that like no one ever thought that there would be a player that would get it and it would shut everything down. I think we knew that if a player got it, that would be the most negative and significant and fast impact for a change, but we just didn't go there. And so we played the game, and that halfway through, the Oklahoma City announcement came through Twitter and sort of and the NBA world that while we were playing, Oklahoma City had shut down their game. And so it was this surreal moment, and Georgia had not been significantly impacted yet. And so I don't think there was a single mask in the building. The major change that we made was that we weren't giving high fives to everyone. Everyone was giving their high elbows or whatever that is supposed to be called. And we thought that was social distancing at the time, how quickly things change. And so we were in the building. We knew that Oklahoma City had basically canceled their game, and we still played. And we were like, okay, let's get this game over. Let's lock this down and let's get out of it. And sure enough, like as things happened, we went into overtime against the Knicks. We ended up losing. But it was like, this game cannot end soon enough. And then our focus was, how do we get all the teams out of the building and safe as soon as possible? Because we had heard in Oklahoma City that they were quarantining their teams inside their locker rooms. And we definitely didn't want that to happen. So it's one of those, like, you're going to always remember where you were when that happened, and it was surreal for sure.
Yeah, and obviously you canceled your concert. So moving forward, what are you doing in terms of modeling and planning for what the future may hold?
So it's super interesting because, like, in that next, like, post March 11th, like, that the world changed, and not because of the NBA, but because of everything that happened. But that it was sort of interesting because I would talk to my friends in other businesses and industries, and it wasn't easy, but it was easier because the decision had been made for us, right? The NBA said we're canceling games. And so we didn't have to struggle with, like, how do we do this? What's the right thing? How do we manage all through these pieces? And so it was in some ways easier. And I don't know if it's still easier, but it is still true that, like, when we return to play, whatever that means, it's outside of our control. Right. And that the NBA represents 30 teams in, I don't know, 22 states or 20 states. And so obviously, right, Georgia can't start playing if California is not starting to play. And so it's really, we're now in this almost like suspended animation. Like, we don't really know what comes next, and where in some ways the lack of control or decision-making control was helpful because it meant that I wasn't, or we weren't responsible for how do we get out of this and how do we do thing. But now it feels like we're just subject to whatever comes next. And that's
exactly. So I suspect you've watched a little of The Last Dance. And I just wanted to kind of get your overall impression from that. And, one of the takeaways besides the whole Michael Jordan thing is just the globalization of basketball, professional basketball. Yeah. And, it talks, David Stern was interviewed before he passed away, and another Columbia grad. And I think they allude to, obviously what happened with Bird and Jordan, but also, with Bird and Magic. But what also happened with Jordan is how it became an international game that really kind of changed the world in terms of basketball. So just kind of your impressions about The Last Dance, but also the globalization of professional basketball too.
Yeah, so I'm only on episode 4 because I'm watching it with my son because I need to educate him. So no spoilers. Don't tell me if they win. No, it's amazing. Like, and so my brother, I have a 3-year older brother. He went to University of Chicago, which is the Columbia of the Midwest. And so he graduated in '86. And so he was there in, like, the heart of Michael Jordan era. And so we're a big Michael Jordan family, and seeing that, I think, is like, it's just one of those, like, it brings back memories and all those pieces. I do think that, I think in some ways, at least what we've watched so far, that it doesn't necessarily give justice to how Jordan changed the business, right? And how Nike and the globalization of it really did just completely alter the sports landscape. And I do think that's just fascinating that one man, right, who was so talented, but had this partnership with one business that had a vision, could really have such an impact. And, like, I don't know, it's a curious thing, like, whatever, like Shaq and the Pump and Reebok, like, that didn't happen. Like, I do think that Phil Knight and Michael Jordan and and David Stern coming together to build something so monumental and so global in such a short period of time, it's an amazing story. I feel like that, like, obviously I'm in the sports business. So I think of it from the business angle in some ways, but I think the impact that Michael Jordan had on business might be greater than the impact that Michael Jordan had on sport.
Yeah, interesting. So you have a marquee player, Trae Young, who's still young, so to speak, no pun intended. How do you see some parallels? Jordan came in; he's obviously a very good player, but he was still the third draft pick in the draft that year. And there were certain things about why people drafted other players ahead of him. But do you feel like this responsibility now within professional sports or basketball to say, okay, we got to identify a potential superstar and market them around that?
Interesting. From your lips to God's ears that our number four pick or number 6 pick traded for number 4 turns into Michael Jordan. But as a team, really, like the number one focus is to win. Yeah. That's what Trae Young is about. And I think that, Travis Schlenk's our GM. He was the assistant GM at Golden State. I think, he was really a key critical decision maker in the draft room, every draft for the Golden State Warriors, that he's a little bit of a savant about identifying talent. And he was sold on Trae Young. Like, I remember the call, it was like November 3rd. He was like, there's this kid from Oklahoma who you gotta watch. But Trae has something special. And I think both on the court and off the court. And I think that's super interesting. And Atlanta has embraced him. When I first got here, the team had just won 60 games in the 2015 season or 2014 season. And so 2014-15 season, I came in November of 2015. And so we were coming off this high, winning 60 games. And then they sort of kept that team together. And then we obviously had to rebuild. And that there was definitely, off the record, sometimes when it wasn't so exciting going to the games. But now every single Trae Young game is just so exciting. I mean, he is so electric on the court, and he has a real personality off the court, and he really does have a bit of that drive, that X factor, that he wants to be special. And so for us, it's not about us creating the superstar; it's about us winning games. I think the league wants to manufacture superstars. It's interesting. So there's a little bit of insight on the GM side, that sort of once a GM, always a GM, I think I would say. Our old GM, and that the GM has become a little bit of a young man's game. Like the data, the analytics, the scouting, being on the road, that's a hard thing. And yet, you see, obviously, Jerry from the logo, he has the staying power, and that these eminence greases that have been GMs in the past, they stay around. And so when I first got here, we had a guy, Rick Sund, who had been our GM for a while, who was like our consultant. We have another GM consultant who, Larry Riley, from the Golden State Warriors, who on draft night, we were off in the corner and we were talking about the Doncic versus Trae Young sort of thing. And no one knew, right? No one had any idea. And, I hesitate to say it, but there was a little bit of could this be for this generation, right? Larry and Magic, right? There was that whole Michigan connection, the Indiana connection, the college, the whole thing. And Boston, LA, maybe Dallas and Atlanta is that for, 2020s. And there could be nothing better than that, right? East Coast, West Coast. That would be awesome.
Yeah, that's great. So currently, what are you doing with your fan base? So you have some type of digital strategy. How are you staying connected with them? And what are some of your goals that you're trying to accomplish till you get back on the court?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we have, so kudos to you for doing things like this. We're doing the exact same thing, right? It's about building content and community with the folks who care about who you are. And so that's, to me, that's why I'm here. I care about Columbia. Go Lions. I care about that. We have the same sort of energy and commitment and connection with our fans. And we've really been focused on creating, we call our season ticket holders members, creating events and experiences and content for our members. And so coming out of The Last Dance, for the last couple episodes, we've had sort of our own version of After the Dance and had video conference webinars with Clyde Drexler and Charles Barkley, hosted by our radio host. And really, the interesting thing is that NBA players don't like to talk about other NBA players. So they're not going to come in and talk all about Michael Jordan and The Last Dance. They're going to talk about their experiences with Michael Jordan. But that kind of thing has been great. Obviously the arena is a live event space. So the arena folks are really busy thinking about what it looks like to come back. But our marketing team, who's all about content and all about video and all about, sharing and social media, they've been as busy as they've ever been. And the final, so it's really been about connecting to our members, creating content for across all of our fan base to keep people engaged, and really just representing what sports is, right? Sports is an escape, right? Sports is a thing to sort of gather around and talk about, and how is that important in these times? And the last and most important piece is really creating community. And so we've done a number of things with our hospital partner at Emory and celebrating the healthcare heroes. We partnered with a number of local restaurants to create meals for all the healthcare heroes during that sort of peak time. So I think we fed over 100,000 meals to healthcare heroes during that time. And then also thinking about those that are hardest hit, and creating pop-up grocery stores and partnering with the Atlanta Food Bank and making sure that the critical needs that our community faces, that we're a part of helping address that. And that's important work.
Yeah, that question came from one of our former women's basketball players, Crystal. So I appreciate. I'm getting some text messages. I see a couple from our men's and women's basketball coach. So I think they're going to ask if you can consult with us in renovating Levy and Gym at some point. So anyway,
I got some ideas for your locker room. And although I will send you a link, Coach Pierce is doing these virtual coaching sessions. And so he's mostly local, like high school coaches, but I'll make sure to send Peter a link, and maybe you guys will join.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. I know that they would love to see some renovations. I think Jonathan Schiller actually may be on this call, but we were fortunate enough to have the floor named in his honor and raise some dollars to so benefit both the men's and women's programs. So his firm is actually Boyce and Schiller, housed in Hudson Yards. So I was curious about what you learned from Hudson Yards, more on the real estate side, and what you learned from that project, which is amazing if you haven't had the chance to go down there, and how that kind of transformed to what you're trying to do on the professional sports side.
No, it's a good question. I always thought, like, starting out, so I went from the DA's office and Manhattan DA's office into Production Securities, which was like a real sort of, it's a big investment bank with a big training program. And that I thought the difference a little bit was, like, when you're at a sort of small entrepreneurial place, you get to do a little bit of everything, and you learn through sort of trial by error. And there's a lot of, like, different things that you do. And then at Production Securities, you learn one thing really, really well, because they do one thing and you're a little bit of a cog, but that's okay, because you learn and you become an expert in that sort of area. I feel that that my sort of prior sports career, right, and then Hudson Yards is a similar example, that I got to do a lot of different things working at a team. Like, teams are small companies. They're sort of entrepreneurial. You get to do a lot of different things. But ultimately, if you think you're in sort of the sports real estate business and you work for a sports team, you do one deal and then you're done. Going to a real estate outfit, working on Hudson Yards, like, you get a lot more throughput, right? And so, we probably financed, 7 million, 8 million square feet of development while I was there, all through different deals. Each one is different. Each one has its own complexities. Each one has its own risks. And so for me, like, to get into the weeds of really complicated real estate stuff and get the repetition, that for me, like, that helped me learn more and give me the confidence that I could come down to Atlanta and run the real estate on my own. I think prior to that, I had done maybe 4 deals. I think after that, I had done 24. And so just that, to me, maybe it was a little bit of confidence, but also was more importantly experience in a variety of, like, you learn from mistakes, you learn from complexity. And Hudson Yards has complexity in abundance.
It's a phenomenal project and obviously very successful. So you mentioned earlier Jay Cross was your mentor. We have, I think, some of our basketball players.
And Arthur Spector. I don't want to, call you
Arthur.
I want to make
Arthur
gave you my first shot.
Exactly. Arthur will be texting both you and I to say, make sure he mentions himself. But so you mentioned Jay and you mentioned Arthur. Tell me about the role that a mentor plays, and then we have some of our current student athletes on the webinar right now. what would you tell them about creating a mentor relationship with somebody and how important it's been for you in your career?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about that, and like, there's a little bit of me that thinks back, like, again, time repeats itself. That, Arthur was 25 years removed from graduating from Columbia when I met him. I'm 27 years removed from that. So I'm at a point in my career when I'm thinking about that a little bit more, and how do I develop those things. But I think for me, and to be perfectly honest, like while I've had people who have worked for me who've gone on to great things, like, they had that in them, right? I don't think I necessarily did anything other than, encourage them and give them some good experiences. But so I can speak at it more from a mentee perspective. Like, I don't know. I really enjoyed sort of feeling like I made myself indispensable to someone, like that I could solve their problems for them, that I could help them and like take the stuff off their plate that like was keeping them away from doing some of the other stuff. And I was lucky enough that I got to do that with people who trusted me and who gave me that opportunity. And so, like, I would say, like, make yourself indispensable, like make yourself that person, that go-to person, who's the first phone call that person's going to make. And you want that to be you. A little bit is that work ethic, a little bit is the relationship and the trust. And I also felt like I'm not, I hope this is I'm not a big ego guy. Like, I'm not trying to do anything. Like, it was one of my first lessons at the DA's office. All right, I worked for just an assistant district attorney who had worked for 9 months on this investigation. He finally gets to go to the press conference, and he's not even up on the dais. He's in the back of the room with me. I'm the trial preparation assistant, and he's sitting next to me. And Robert Morgenthau, who is a famous, august district attorney, is up on the stage. And I say to him, I was like, "Aren't you mad? Are you mad about that?" And he's like, "No, that's how it works. I do my job to make him look good." Yeah. And I think that sort of stuck with me. Yeah. And you can't run your whole career like that. And yet, maybe you can, because if you make yourself, trustworthy and indispensable to great people, great things come your way. That's my experience.
Yeah, that's a great advice. So I would attribute that partly to you being a crew team. It's an amazing team sport. You're on the water. You're on the water at a ridiculous time. It's cold. It's all the different conditions you work. What do you kind of pull back and think about your crew experiences and what they mean to you and how they've established your foundation and your mindset and your work ethic?
Yeah, absolutely. Waking up early. Like early bird, right, is a cliche. Now I sound like a dad, but I think that's 100% true. Like, I do think that crew especially, but athletics overall, like, it gives you that no excuse mentality. There's no excuses. Like, there's no, like, I can't do this. Yeah. There's like, you can. You just got to work at it. It gives you that sense of sacrifice, that sense of like, I'm sacrificing today, right, for something else in the future. And then the other thing, which I think is a little bit unique to being the guy that steers the boat, is like being very action oriented. Like that, it's very easy to sort of sit back and like get caught up in like, the thought process and, all the inputs and like, how do I make a decision and not actually make a decision? Right. And that I think what I learned from athletics, and I was not a high school athlete. Right, I was the nerd, or not. I was not the athlete in high school by any stretch. But that I think what it gave me was that like that bias towards action, and that any action that you take is better than no action, because you can also course correct, right? But that you create that momentum, right? You create the force and the momentum of energy and forward movement. And once you get moving, then you can move, you can change, you can course correct. But if you're not moving, you're not doing anything, and that's no good.
Great advice. So that leads, how in the world did you become a coxswain? Did somebody just like recruit you on the steps of the library? And it
was the postcard from Larry Noble as a freshman, and they had the big wooden boat with the old wooden oars. And I was like, I think the 1988 Olympics sort of had just happened. And I was like, you know what? Like, I was not I do think that to me, that was part of what was so amazing about Columbia and about, I think, college in general, but the opportunity to remake yourself, to not be the same person that you were in high school. Yeah. And so for me, like, I wasn't the athlete, but I was like, you know what, like, let me try that. I want to do that. I want to be part of that. And I don't know if any of my good friends from like they said they were going to join. I hope they didn't. But my like closest, best friends for life are from that Columbia crew team for life.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I know Kyriakos, you rode with Kyriakos, and he became a trustee. And then Alex Naval, before he tragically passed away, was a trustee, and now Dean DeColis is a trustee, and Tom Kornacki.
Oh, right. Yes.
Is the chair of the board of visitors. So it's amazing how rowing is integrated into the leadership of our university. And I attribute that to some kind of the life lessons that you learned on the water too.
It's the crucible.
That's awesome. Very cool. I'm fascinated with Boys in the Boat, that it has yet to become a movie. I'm waiting for that one. So I don't know if it's in process somewhere or in production, but it's just a matter of time where that takes place. Let me shift a little bit towards your world in terms of technology. You know, we live in this ever-expanding world, and 10, 15 years ago, Silicon Valley was a word we weren't really familiar with, and whether it be Facebook, or whether it be Twitter, or whether it be Instagram, and now TikTok, and all these different things. How do you stay on top of what's out there and what's coming up and what's the next big thing, and making sure that you guys are part of it?
So you hire really young, smart, newly minted grads, hopefully from Columbia. No, you got to hire young people. It's funny. I was talking to somebody, one of the Brooklyn Nets guys, and he was like, like the folks who are running our content and marketing, we're too old. We need to hire 23-year-olds. And so, right, youth is currency. So if I had advice, take advantage of that currency, spend that currency, spend that well. But I do think I'm at a point that it's past me, not in a bad way of like, I can't figure it out. I know it's important, but you need to rely on the folks who sort of, whether it's, digital natives or whatever it is, that really live and breathe it and came up through it to really sort of come up and understand that. So that would be, maybe that's a flippant response, but I think that would be my first response.
Yeah, no. It's probably a very wise one. So how about analytics? Obviously you have the business side of the analytics, and then you have the sports side of the analytics. Do you have an analytics division, and how do they interact with both those enterprises?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of teams are set up somewhat differently, but in general, at least in my experience, that there's this, we're the sports business, but there's the sport and there's the business. And that the way that we're organized is that we have a CEO and a GM, and they both report up to our ownership. And I think that's the right structure. I think any other structure, I think that there's this sort of like the little like, sort of Lord of the Rings, sort of everyone wants to wear the ring to make the sport decisions. But just like what I do, I think, is an expertise. What my GM does, or our GM does, is an expertise. Mm-hmm. We have no interest for the business to try to dictate what they do, and they should have no interest to dictate what we do. But yet we come together to create a great product. And so that's a long-winded way to say we have two different analytics departments. Our analytics group has grown from about 4 people to about 9 now. That on the business side, we do everything. We're almost like an airline in terms of ticket pricing. So we do variable ticket pricing across all of our product. We do a ton of analytics, lots of reporting and dashboards across all of our businesses. I mean, to me, the interesting thing about sports is like it's a big brand, but a little businesses made up of lots of little businesses. So we might have we sell $20 million worth of food at our arena. We're one of the biggest restaurants in Atlanta, right? We park 400,000 cars a year, right? We're one of the biggest parking operators in Atlanta. We have a huge hospitality division. Right? So we're lots of little businesses, and we need the analytics in order to support that. And so they drive lots of our decision making. And then separate and apart from that, the basketball side we have 2. Some people have a lot more who basically create their own sort of boutique-like databases to track and analyze player information, both on the recruiting and player personnel side, but also on the scouting side in terms of performance.
Right. So you alluded to a couple. You have a variety of sources of revenue. Obviously, you have TV revenue. You have just ticket revenue. You have a revenue through your corporate sponsorship programs. How do you kind of manage all of those silos, if you will, those financial silos, to make sure they come together and help you reach your goals and objectives?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think like Internally, I think a lot of what we try to do is really sort of focus on sort of like the why, right? Why we're here, what we're about. And that then focus, right, allows us to filter through all our other businesses. And since we opened the arena, we've really taken a tack, right, based on some sort of junior people that we've hired to really think about the customer first, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to think about this, like this live experience and the hospitality experience that we're trying to provide. And so sort of we've hired a bunch of people with hotel experience, for example, and not necessarily in sports experience. And so it starts with the customer for us, and we provide a great experience for our customers. That means we sell more tickets. If we sell more tickets, then we have more people in the building to help us sell more sponsorships. And that if we sell more sponsorships, we're going to be more successful overall. And so like that's sort of the through line that we look at. You know, TV is a huge piece of our business, probably about a third of our revenue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I talk to some of my counterparts and they think of their business as we're a digital media company.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I think that. I think we're a local hospitality company. The digital media business is not revenue that we sell. The league sells it, or we sell it for 10 years in advance.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you sell a contract for 10 years, right, how am I going to keep my staff motivated and keep getting better every day if the contract's already signed?
Right.
That doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
You need to think about what's the day-to-day where I can improve and touch people every day to get better. And that's how we've approached it.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question in terms of staying on top of your industry. What are you, particular books you're reading? How do you stay on top of what you're trying to do in terms of running, obviously, a multi-million-dollar business and making sure you're close to what's the next wave or the next big idea that's out there?
Right. So for the recent grads, a plug for the Sports Business Journal. I think they have like a recent grad like rate, but the Sports Business Journal is the Bible for our industry, and you learn so much from that. I think one of the really great things about being in the sports industry is that even within the NBA, but across leagues, that while we compete on the court, we're all really open and collaborative and sharing on the business practices. The NBA is probably the most advanced in terms of they have it's almost like a management consulting group within their business operations called Teamboat,
right.
Team Business Operations, and that's a really great learning ground for folks who want to understand the business, understand teams, and that they hire young folks. And they go out and they're consultants and they get 8 teams and they travel, or 8 or 10 teams, I don't know how many, and they travel around and they meet them and talk to them and help manage their businesses and learn from each other. So there's a lot of learning from each other, of stealing ideas from each other. And yet we're operating in our own markets. And so that's really open. I also think equally important is learning from outside of sports. Like I talked a little about the hotel side of things, that like, yes, sports is an industry, but it's almost made up of a bunch of little industries and businesses. And so what can you learn from there that applies to sports is also a really interesting exercise.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a little bit of that Disney mindset where, you refer to members, you refer to obviously your customers, you're invested in them. So talk a little bit about how important though your customers are to you and the members that you deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, like, I think, coming from business school, that everyone always used to try to say, oh, we want to convert our customers into fans. I always used to joke, like, they are fans. We need to convert our fans into customers. And so I think sports that's why it's such an interesting, unique business from my perspective, is that like it comes ready-made with this just really emotional connection, right, between your customer and your product. Right. And that's what business is all about. Like, how do I create an emotional connection with my customer? We have it. And so how do we not ruin it, right? How do we make sure when they come, they have a really good experience? How do we not poison that relationship between, talking about the money or talking about the things that sort of undermine that? Like, we have that emotional connection. And so how do we preserve that? How do we make the most of that? And how do we build on that in order to have that customer for life? So one of the things that we're doing is really sort of thinking about, and Trae Young makes it so much easier, right? He's a guard, he's a little guy, like young people gravitate towards that. It's the Steph Curry phenomenon. And so for us, creating that next generation of fans, first and foremost in Atlanta, but everywhere there's a Trae Young fan, is important to us. And so, we do camps, we do outreach, we do all those types of things to try to convert sort of the youth to be fans for the future.
Yeah. So you worked in the NFL. NFL consists of 16 games, and then all of a sudden you transfer into the NBA, and you got 82 games. What was that process like? You're at the arena a lot, and then you have concerts and everything else going on. I suspect, just out of curiosity, how many concerts a year are you booking in the State Farm Arena?
So Atlanta's a huge concert market. So we'll have 50 real concerts a year that sell out. And then our goal is to have between 125 and 150 events a year. But that's family shows, wrestling, concerts. We'll book it out we're right next to our convention center downtown. So we'll book it out for certain events like that. But 50 major concert, everyone from sort of, the Eagles to Snoop Dogg to Jay-Z to Adele. So that's huge.
And so that question of that 16 games a year to 82 games a year and the concerts and everything, what was that transformation like for you?
In some ways it's easier because it's less about the number of events and it's about the number of people. MetLife Stadium, 80,000 people, 80,000 people is a lot of people to come together at once. And it's just it's just really hard to give everyone a great experience, right? I used to say I forget what the town was in New Jersey that had 80,000 people, but it's like, if you bring that town together every day and they have to all drive in and drink and eat and go to the bathroom and get to their seats, you're going to have challenges. We actually took one of the things that we did in our arena, we took it down from 19,000 seats down to about 16,500. And there's just something so much more manageable about that number of people. You feel more in control. You're at an NFL game, because there's only really 8 or 10, home games. You're sort of riding a rocket. You don't know what's going on and you can't be responsive. Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the Atlanta Falcons built with Atlanta United, Arthur Blank, unbelievable NFL owner, opened right next door to us. That I believe that you learn from doing. Right. And so in 1 year, we had 120 events that we learned from. In order for Mercedes-Benz to learn from 120 events, that's going to take them 6 years. It's just so much harder. And so from a personal perspective, definitely going to every game. I don't go to every concert, but going to every game is more. And yet at the same time, the challenge was more about the number of people coming together at once. And 15,000 people is so much more manageable than 75,000 people that it's almost a blessing.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. Well, listen, I know we have a couple minutes left here. I want to thank you so much for your time. Obviously being a Columbia grad, being a former student athlete, what would you like to share with this group that we haven't asked you about?
Oh, well, I think those were great questions. Eric and the entire team have been great to deal with. This was the best list of prep questions that I've ever had. So I appreciate that. I just want to say, I think maybe 2 things. One, I think kudos to you for bringing this group together and developing this community. Columbia has a special place in my heart for sure. I think I share that with everyone who took this time to join this call. But this is building community. This is building sort of that Columbia tradition, which I very much want to be a part of, and hopefully have been and will continue to be. So I would just say thank you for that. Thank you for everything that you're doing for Columbia, and appreciate you, and go Lions. So,
yeah, Awesome. Thanks, Thad. We appreciate it. One of the things that I'm constantly reminded about our Columbia grads and our alumni, how much they care about their institution, how much they care about the experience that they have, and how much they support what we're trying to accomplish. And there's a lot of good things going on as a result of people like you supporting our initiative. So on behalf of our coaches, our administration, our university, all of our alums that are here with us tonight, thank you. I appreciate you. Wish you all the best. Hopefully we'll get back to normalcy sooner than later. But, I really believe that we'll become a better society as a result of what we're going through right now, whether it be more empathy or more charitable. And I think we'll be better for it. But I wish you all the best and your family. And thank you again for spending time with us.
And to you and your families.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for joining us. I just want to remind everybody that next Tuesday, the 26th at 8 p.m., will be the annual Varsity C show. It's now virtual C this year for obvious reasons. Everybody should have gotten an invite. There will be more updates coming and reminders coming, but please attend. It's open for everybody. We'd love for you all to come celebrate our seniors and celebrate the year that they had. and show your appreciation for everything they've done. So thank you all. Thank you, Thad. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Eric.
We
Thanks,
appreciate
Peter.
it.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks.